and we are joined by a couple of our uh, teammates who are into the GeoInt space as well. So we've got our chief scientist actually on the call today, Ron Goldblatt. We've got our GeoInt program manager, Larry Curran on. And it takes a couple of minutes to get the audience unloaded, but we start. And I'm going to share my screen because one of our team members, Richard, put together a quick PowerPoint kind of centered around what we're doing today. I am looking at the wrong screen. That is the one I want to see. And this is kind of a slideshow, very, very quick on who we have on today. So I want to say thank you for joining us today. This is our ongoing series every week. And as people are joining, thank you for joining. This is a talk, lunch and learn kind of event where we have a low threshold preparedness readiness requirement where we invite internal team members or guests from the industry with various angles. And this is a special one for me personally. GIS Day, talking to Shawana Johnson, Dr. Shawana Johnson, who is the president of Global Marketing Insights, Inc. She has got a deep background in GIS, geoscience, GEOINT, and she's also one of the first people that my boss reported to. So my boss's boss years ago. So I'm very excited for having you on today, Shawana. Thank you so much for making the time and accepting my invitation, because I know you were like literally, I think 2 or 3 different presentations this week. So I don't hear all about that and making time for us and our team in the global geospatial GeoInt community. So I want to welcome you and I'm excited because it's personal and very timely for the GIS Day, because you have the history. We started talking before we started kicking this thing off formally. You were one of the first people to put GIS in the commercial and in television. Literally, people are understanding what it is. So I do want to hear if you could say a couple of words of yourself, your company, what you guys do, and so on, Shawana.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure, G. I told you anything for you. Tried to help you along. I think you were a college intern when you first actually started.
Yes, I was.
And we've been fast friends ever since. So that's been a while ago, and now you're running your own company. So that's fabulous. My PhD is in economics and tech transfer. That came a lot farther down the road from when I got into GIS and remote sensing and geospatial technology. I started off in high performance computing with GE, Information Services Corporation, long before anybody called it that.
Yeah.
And I got called by some friends at GE Aerospace out of Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And they said, hey, GE won a contract and they own part of a company. We need you to come and interview for the job of US sales director, North American sales director. And they said, do you still want to do international work? And I said, yeah, I'm in New York. I'm getting ready to go over to Europe and do that. And they said, well, come and interview for this. It's satellite technology. To which I said, what? And I said, I'm pretty sure I don't even know if satellite has 1 T or 2 T's, and I think you're calling the wrong person. And they said, no, it's really a government contract that was awarded to GE Aerospace and Hughes Aircraft. And they had 2 missions, a dual purpose mission. The first mission was to commercialize remote sensing around the world. And the second mission was to educate the world on remote sensing. And it was always meant to be a 5-year to 10-year mission. And then the evolution would take everything back to pure commercial work. The oversight was NASA, NOAA, some parts of the intelligence community.
Yeah.
And as such, we had people on our board of directors, like Jeff Harris, the Honorable Jeff Harris, who
Yeah.
was the director of the National Reconnaissance Office, as well as a gentleman named Jim Clapper, who was running the Geospatial division of the agency where he came from. And we all know he ended up at the DNI. So those were our board of directors, made up also of executives from GE Aerospace and Valley Forge. I went to the interview into a room where they were just moving everything out of NASA, Building 32, and starting to get it into a real commercial space. And then I went to another meeting where I had no idea really where I was, and red lights are flashing, and I'm being escorted very closely. I didn't even realize at the time I was in a classified facility, and all the special permission that went along with that. And they took me into a room, and I was actually looking at Landsat data. But, you know, I saw the top blowing off of Mount Fuji. I saw Yellowstone on fire. I saw the RLC and the depletion and the drying up of the RLC. And I just wandered around the room, and they asked me questions like, how would you commercialize this stuff? And I said, well, how do you get it back here to this computer? How does it do that?
Yeah.
They said, well, we have these things called ground stations, and we bring them over. And I said, well, how do you get it on the screen? I mean, don't you have to do something to it? And they said, yeah, it's a software, lots of software called ERDOS Imagine. And then this slide I'm showing you is a guy named Jack Dangerman out of Esri. And I said, well, okay, I'd set up distributor networks all over the world. And how many of these ground stations do you have? And they said, well, not very many, we need more. And I said, well, you gotta have more of those. And I said, around those ground stations globally, there'll be pockets of intelligence. Right. And we'll go build off of those people that already have maybe businesses and have the capability to use the data. And I said, we need to go to these guys that run these software companies and get them to give us their software for free. And we put images for free. And do you have people that can write training curriculum? And they said, yeah, we have an applied science team. And that was Jim Durana and Dr. Tina Carey at the time.
Yeah, Tina.
I said, well, we put together the training curriculum, we package it up, and we deliver it, I guess, to people in geography, geology, oil and gas. And they said, great. So at the end of that meeting, I saw my boss, my past boss at GE, and soon to be my new boss again, Dr. Stephen Cox. And he said, great, so when can you begin? I said, well, when am I going to have the interview? And he said, you just had it. So that's how it all started. And it was an immediate love affair with remote sensing.
How did you guys come up with the name EOSat? I don't want to forget that one, but I remember, I think you guys were just creating that whole sense of what this is going to be, the EOS.
It was already created by the time I got there. They had been in business. President Reagan commercialized space with the Land Remote Sensing Act, and I believe that was in 1983. Okay. And but for a while, GE and Hughes Aircraft didn't know what to do, so they hired a lot of scientists to look at the data. But that's not what the public law stated. The public law stated commercialize remote sensing and educate the world about remote sensing. So they really had not engaged yet in the business side of it. So I didn't enter the picture until 1990. So they had already been stood up. They were just moving and miniaturizing because compute had come down to, we were running Landsat because the asset they wanted to commercialize was the Earth Remote Sensing Terrain System, ERTS-1. And by that time it was Landsat 4. And that was what was being commercialized. And it met with a lot of conflict because people wanted the data for free, but the Reagan administration and the White House Science and Technology Council wanted to commercialize remote sensing because they had a great vision of actually where we are today. So the goal was to get the rest of the world used to the data and then bring it back and put it back into the government, and which is why Landsat is free again. They're trying to build the business acumen around Landsat. So they were already the Earth observation satellite company was stood up, I came in through the GE Aerospace side.
Well, I met you. I was an intern from the University of Maryland Geographical Information Science Department, which I'm a student back again, by the way, over there now. It's interesting. I'm for a master's program there. But yeah, I met you, I think in late 94. You guys had just started commercializing even Landsat 5, which was active.
Yep.
And I think, yeah, on my first day, I walked around, got introduced to a few people. You know, I was like, I had no idea where this was going to go either, but, you know, it was just when the 8mm tapes were getting hot, right? And I think your charge and the whole team at EOSat, everyone from Dr. Tina Carey, Brenda Burrows, a whole series of professional science and technology commercialization folks who were so welcoming, yet with a, I don't know how, I don't know if he knew where it was going to go exactly, but the vision was there to commercialize and then bring remote sensing to the world. How did you transition? I know obviously that was the beginnings of the commercialization of geoscience with imagery, especially from satellites. It starts with GEOINT, really, and it's continued to evolve. I mean, the major consumer producer of content is the GEOINT world. How did you transform? What was the storyline like for going into more and more GEOINT once you guys really fully commercialized? I think, and I also want to talk about EOSat becoming space imaging. There was a lot of transformation and learning what the commercialization will mean.
Yeah.
And your role in that.
So the first thing we did, and what I was chartered to do, was to stand up a global distribution network. Right. And the way we did that is we went to all the ground stations and found all of the small businesses all around the ground stations. Right. And the ones that stood out in a major way were the Euromage.
Yeah, Euromage.
Which is now today known as eGeos, but it is the original Euromage. And then we had other major networks in Japan, believe it or not, in Mongolia.
Really?
And we had distributors in Russia. We had major distributors in India, as well as Africa and South America. And we partnered at the time with the folks that were offering and running McDonnell Detweiler and Associates, the RadarSat system.
Right.
So we found all the pockets all over the world near the ground stations, and we set up master and distributor network agreements.
Right.
And that was literally the underpinnings of the first series of distributors. Now, at the same time, a company out of Toulouse, France, stood up Spotimage.
Right.
And they had offices in Virginia as well. And together, we kind of piggybacked off, and people like to say we were competitors. We were never competitors. Our data was very different. Yeah. We were not competitors with the aerial industry. They were very complementary. Yeah. And so we were busy building the backbone of the value-added distribution network, as well as the educational system, because we had to get that data out to universities. So we started out with basically 5 in the US. We ended up with 3,600 universities that had the training curriculum. Right. And we eventually got Spot to add in their data. So it was Erdos Imagine processing software from Lori Jordan and Bruce Rado's company, Jack Dangerman GIS, right. Esri GIS, and Landsat data and Spot data, with use cases that then they could employ for oil and gas, mining, global food security, for agriculture, actually for land use, land cover, and change detection, things like that. So as that was being built, and all those people, Tony Shupin,
Yeah.
Susan Sinclair, Brenda Burrows, they had regional, Mickey Barber, they had
Yeah.
Max Kahn, you name it. We had a sales team, but they each had regional responsibility.
Right.
And their regional responsibility was first and foremost to support the master distributor and the distributors. And then secondly, to build that network, because we knew we didn't have enough money or enough time to actually sell individually. And then we also had a government division who did nothing but support our government clients as well. And that was Nate Boyer, who is now Dr. Nathan Boyer.
Dr. Nate.
Yeah, Dr. Nate. So, so that group was emerging and building and growing, and we also had a lot of responsibility, and we had to answer to NOAA, NASA, and our board of directors,
Right.
who were our oversight monitors. In the meanwhile, Dr. Walter Scott and good friends of mine were building a company called Earthwatch. I think it was Earthwatch, Earth something. And so we went out and got to be friends with them because we wanted to see what were their plans for the next smaller, faster, more agile, improved resolution satellite. So we all kind of banded together. We all knew each other really well. We started putting on a series of seminars and workshops. Started out in just the United States, where we literally went into a city and did everything we could to get about 200 people at a time there, so we could show them the satellite data and all of the things that it could do. So over time, as big companies do, GE Aerospace sold their division because Jack Walsh's philosophy was, if you're not one or two, you will be sold. And GE Aerospace was number 3 in the aerospace industry.
Right.
GE Aerospace sold to Martin Marietta. Martin Marietta then merged with Lockheed. So that piece of our ownership was Lockheed Martin. At the same time, Hughes Aircraft sold the division that was responsible for EOSat. They sold it to General Motors. So we were actually, on our board was Martin Marietta and General Motors at one time. And then General Motors, because they were looking at mapping. And so that was the very first screen. And we were, you were buying CDs to upgrade your map.
Yep.
And they thought, they envisioned a day when the GPS would give us a live feed. And they were working with people at what was called Keyhole, which became Google. And we were all on those project teams together, and with Rand McNally, the map people, I mean.
Right.
So then General Motors said, well, we don't think this is what we're going to do. And they literally got out of that business. And at that point in time, Hughes Aircraft sold, or don't know the real business deal, but they gave back their ownership to Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin merged the Earth Observation Satellite Company with actually what was called CRISS, C-R-S-S, Lockheed Martin Commercial Remote Sensing Systems. And they were out of Sunnyvale, California. And they were building what we would have called the first space imaging system. When they decided to move out of Sunnyvale, California, they moved to Thornton, Colorado.
Thornton, Colorado.
And then they became space imaging. We were finally merged as a standalone company with space imaging, EOSat. And for a while, for a year, we were called SII/EOSat. And the plan was then to drop the EOSat name and go back to Space Imaging Incorporated. And then our big distribution networks became Eurimage Space Imaging, or Japan Space Imaging, or Europe Space Imaging. So the distributor network changed a little bit. Some of our big distributors stood on their own, Eurimage stood on its own, but we had Japan Space Imaging, and those groups all pretty much still exist today.
You do.
And so we combined the engineering resources and the sales resources, and the two organizations came together.
Nice.
Lockheed Martin at that point in time had made a decision. They didn't care for the commercial side of the business in terms of where they were going to focus their growth, because they built billion-dollar birds. Landsat was 500 million.
Yeah.
And they decided they wanted to not continue to participate in that commercial side of the house. And lots of things were going on in the government. The FIA system, FIA, was coming around, and General Clapper was the director of NGA, and he saw a great commercial future and wanted that commercial capability to be available for the GEOINT community. Had not been called GEOINT yet. And that was for the DoD, the intelligence community, but yet it would be operated as a commercial asset.
Right.
So Lockheed Martin was going to bid on that. Another company, Orbital Science Corporation, or the Image, had built some satellites. They were going to bid on it. And that's really what started the what I'd call the GEOINT evolution. We weren't yet called that, but that's the beginnings of it. And so for me, I started my PhD during all of that. And I went in to see my boss, the Honorable Jeffrey Harris, and John Koppel. John Koppel had come up to space imaging from Raytheon. And I said, what do you mean we're getting out of the commercial business? This is going to take over the world. What are you kidding me? So I wrote a white paper with my PhD cohort, and I brought it back to them and said, this is how big the industry is going to be. This is how fast it's going to grow. There'll eventually be more commercial satellites than there will be government satellites. And 2 weeks later, I got a bonus. And I thought,
Nice.
and I didn't even really know it was a bonus. I thought they'd made a mistake. So I called up the human resource people at Thornton, said, hey, you made a mistake. And they said, no, you got a bonus. So I went to see John Koppel and Jeff Harris, and they said, yeah, that was a great white paper. And I said, well, thank you for the bonus. You've changed your mind. And they said, no, we didn't change our mind, but we thought that was a great white paper. And we don't want to lose you. And I said, but you're going to stop doing the very thing that I said we need to do. And they had come up with a plan. Space imaging was going to have regional operating centers, and they were called ROCs. And they were going to charge a lot of money, and they thought regions would go in and put all their money in a regional operating center. Well, I'd spent a decade going around getting to know all these people. And I pretty much, as you know me, I'm pretty animated. So I violently opposed that idea and told them why it wasn't going to work. And they said, okay, but we are going to do this, and it's going to work. And so I went back to my PhD cohort and said, they're going to get out of the business as I see it. I want to stand up my own company. So we designed a business plan around supporting nothing but commercial providers of imagery, airborne, spaceborne, and terrestrial sensors.
Right.
And developed 3 products because they needed it. These were mostly scientists and academics. They needed strategic planning, they needed marketing and sales services, and they needed research. Went back in, saw Jeff and John, and said, I'm going to resign. I'm going to start this company. And they said, okay, you're not going to go with any competitors. I'm like, pretty sure we don't really have that many competitors. No. And they said, what can we do to help you? And I said, it would be really good if I could have the database that I've spent a decade building. And they said, sure. And they signed a document so that in a tech transfer, I could have access to it. They gave me the computers in the office for $1, all the paper clips, because they were never going to ship all that stuff back, because we were doing networked business long before anybody else was doing it. And we did a lot of things by phone and online. already at that time, because GE had been a test node for the internet. So
Yeah.
we were using email long before lots of other people were. So
Yeah.
long story short, they gave me the database and said, we'll help you get started. They were some of my first clients for market research: NOAA, NASA, USGS, the DoD Intel community. And from that research, we had researchers all over the world that were part of the value-added distributor community that I'd worked with for so long.
Right.
And then we just literally started building the business to help the commercial sensor developers and providers stand up their businesses. And then Lockheed Martin did not participate, or they may have pulled out of that contract for the government, but Space Imaging did not win. Orb Image won, and Orb Image kind of took over Space Imaging. Digital Globe, which was Dr. Walter Scott's company, so Earthwatch came about. So Digital Globe and GEOINT won. And then over time, the government changed that contract, and Digital Globe kind of merged with GEOINT and took that group over. That's kind of the beginning. And there was a lot of other things going on at the same time. So if you read the USGS account of Landsat, there are a lot of factions and a lot of different groups involved, because people wanted it to be for free. The government, the policy, and then bureaucratics, the government politicals wanted to inspire a whole global industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we just kind of got caught up in that collision. And I can say it was it's redirected my career and my life. And when I tell people the story, they say, wow. I said, yes, it could only be orchestrated by God. Nobody else could have figured this all out, how it's going to work. So there you have it. And today, that's still what I do. I work bridging commercial technology into the government and help bridge commercial technology out of the government, only if it's geospatially related or has a GEOINT capability.
Well, this is a, to be honest with you, a lot of people don't know the history, and especially that commercialization track where we are. A few years ago, there was I think the beginning of this administration and then parts of last administration in the US, there were talks about reimposing costs on remote sensing data from the government. And obviously, that has gone down the track of free for like 25 years. And now there is that conversation, there is that debate. I want to hear your insight on that. But things happen along the way, and I got introduced into the world that you were forming and building in 94, 95, and Landsat 6 burned up on the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that was a little bit of obviously it was a downside to the Landsat program for a few years, but I think that spurred further what you've been building with the IRS system out of India, and others, because you guys were quickly able to re-strategize, map how we're going to keep going. And I remember being like the most junior person you could be in a company. I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And then, well, don't worry, hang tight.
So GE Aerospace, Hughes Aircraft, these are massive corporations. We came up through a very regimented and well-trained executive line. So all of us had been to GE's executive management school it was called Crotonville. And Jack Welsh referred to it as Little Harvard on the Hudson. And he made sure we were all any executive was extremely well trained and well prepared in the strategic planning. And they were well ahead of their time. These were not books that sat on a shelf. These were operational, action-oriented strategic plans. So there had always been a plan B, because for Landsat 6, because you don't strap a bomb to a prize $500 million asset and launch it into space and hope that everything goes right. And I mean, literally, you know, that's what you're doing.
Right.
And sure enough, the worst occurred. We had an O-ring failure. And I think actually you were in the building. I was sitting on the steps of, as you looked into mission management at 3 in the morning and 4 in the morning. I mean, we were waiting to hear from NORAD to see if the satellite communicated. And at 3 or 4 a.m., we got the word, and the engineers turned through the glass window and looked at me. And I was sitting on the steps with a few people and watching them, and they gave us the thumbs down that there had been no communication. The bird had been lost, and sobbing. I mean, so, you know, so we got that all out of our system. We were crying and sobbing, and I said, okay, now we know, and plan B, and that we had a plan B, and plan B had been in the works for 9 to 10 months. And Timothy Pecorius, if you remember Tim Pecorius,
I still keep
and a group of other people had been orchestrating the deal with the India Space Research Organization and Antrix. Antrix was like EOSat. It was the commercial operating arm of their NASA, just like EOSat was kind of a commercial arm of our NASA. Right. EOSat was. And so Plan B went into effect, and that plan had already, the deals had been inked that we would then start receiving their data at our ground station, our brand new ground station, which we so brightly put in the lightning capital of the world, Norman, Oklahoma. But it was the place in the United States that had the largest horizon to horizon view, vantage point. It was the largest collection area, unobstructed collection area.
As evidenced by lightning.
That's correct. And it's known for lightning. So within 3 months after that launch failure, we had a ribbon cutting ceremony and a massive press component to the Indians coming to the Norman, Oklahoma office, and we received our very first IRS image at Norman, Oklahoma. And we substituted, and remember, like I said, this wasn't overnight that we thought of this. Our science team, Dr. Carey, Jim Durana, there's so many others that are still in the industry. A lot of them are now working in the intelligence community as well, have won significant amount of awards. You guys know who you are. So thank you. And they had been developing the change detection and intermosaicing of using IRS data with Landsat so that we could provide a seamless crossover to our clients. And remember, our largest client was the US Department of Agriculture Foreign Ag Service. They were the single largest user of multispectral data in the world. And they did global crop yield predictions. That was one of their inputs. And so we had long been working that behind the scenes so that there was always a fail-safe mechanism in place, while then space imaging was launching their own satellite, and then we were getting ready to bid on the big NGA contract at the time.
Yeah, and you know, this fast forward, I mean, those kind of things do shape some of the aspects of globalization. Obviously, that was in the mid 90s, and you move forward, you've got a plethora of satellites, just as you guys had envisioned, that the commercialization would spur commercialization and other non-government entities launching into space for remote sensing specifically. And that commercialization really did take hold. And I do want to say that we are literally at 12:35. So if people have questions for Dr. Johnson, she will answer you. So either chat
I'll
it
send you to someone who can answer you.
or send me to someone, or yeah, send us to someone who can answer it. But to be, so we can, there's a deep history, obviously, right? So none of this stuff that we're dealing with, all this commercially available planet, obviously that's the one that's got the most, last night I want to recognize too, our astronauts made it to the ISS on a commercial spaceship. So it's not just satellites for capturing data, we're sending people on commercial. So the commercialization was going to happen, and you guys were in the fight building that. I want to hear your view of where we are now, where do you see the industry trajecting towards? Obviously, there are going to be unknowns. We can't plan just for the unknowns. We got to also know some things. So where do you see the next 5 to 10 years? Obviously, it's going to be a question about AI, machine learning. How does that help or enhance or even detract potentially on the future of continued commercialization, use cases of remote sensing? And really would love to hear your thoughts on that. I know a lot of people on the call or in the future are going to be wondering who was the oracle behind some of these things.
So yes, I've often been known as being on the very bleeding edge, waiting for these things to come along that we've seen in the back rooms of a lot of technical shops over the years, right? But getting it to the commercial forefront and in use is, it's taken longer in a lot of respects than we thought it would, because there's a lot of governments involved. It's hard. What we do is truly rocket science and space science, and we need astrophysicists and material science specialists and fluid dynamic specialists. I mean, it's very complex. However, that great collision of storage compute and the price of compute dropping so drastically, and then the availability of the cloud, or what I call distributed analytics. So we were always, when I came to GEOSat, we were doing distributed analytics. It was called timeshare. So the concept isn't new, but the collision and the price points falling, then the miniaturization of processing, the miniaturization of the hardware, the cost of compute dropping was just the great recipe for allowing all this great science and the research science out of all these universities and federally funded laboratories, provincially funded laboratories all over the world to begin to exercise what they had always dreamed of doing. And the last decade has seen more government scientists leaving their government career and launching off into their own to build sensors, build launch vehicles, miniaturized launch vehicles, smaller buses, new payload capability, as well as the satellites. But I'll tell you where I believe we're headed. I try to always spend a lot of time where we aren't, because I'm always trying to figure out what is the next thing. So I spend a lot of time with industrial supply chain companies. And that was a nut we could never crack. It's not like Cargill and big Swiss Re and big supply chain companies weren't, Bunge, Archer Daniel Midland, you name it. They were around when we were building GEOSat. However, they didn't have the remote sensing teams. They went through a few, Exxon Mobil, Chevron, Royal Dutch Shell. They went through a time period where they had big remote sensing capabilities. And then when the price of the barrel fell, that sometimes was the first team of people that was let go, because you had to invest a lot to get the scientists, buy the data, get the equipment, get the software. So we saw a lot of ebbs and flows, but right now I would tell you, the supply chain, the industrial supply chain organizations, and consumer product good organizations, major insurance corporations, they've all dabbled in maybe investing in an aerial product or looked at buying their own satellite, but they want the insights that multi-modes of sensors provide them. And I mean sensors, terrestrial, airborne, however that is, unmanned or manned, and satellite. And they don't want to have to worry, who do I buy it from? How much do I pay per pixel? They want a solution. They want an insight, and they want to pay for those insights. And they want it a time frame that it impacts their decision that they have to make about their own business. Decisions that sometimes occur in seconds, and they have to make a market decision of how to move their own assets, or logistically how to manage their own cargo and goods. So the speed at which our future clients want information is just traveling forward at a speed we never dreamed of. But they also don't want to buy the data. They don't want to buy pixels. They want a solution. And there comes into this then cloud providers, the costs are coming down in ingress and egress for the cloud. Different providers are showing up differently, be they government, be they commercial, and machine learning, not so much artificial intelligence yet, but machine learning is what's automating those tipping and queuing scenarios, so that that commercial customer can say, I've gotten an alert, this factory has had a natural disaster, the rail line is shut down, the shipping line is shut down, and I've gotten an alert about that. They don't really care if it's 1 meter, half meter high-res data, or synthetic aperture radar data, or LiDAR data. They just want to know that there's confidence with an associated error metric with it, and that they can make a decision with confidence, and they'll pay for those insights. Most of those people have large territories to cover, countries, and it's a big change, because we still want to, those of us in the industry, people still want to charge for that data. And by the time you price it out with a machine learning capability, which needs a lot of data to train that machine learning and to train those algorithms, it can be a hefty amount. And I saw somebody just asked a question that I think is really part of the answer to this.
Yeah, so Dr. Ron Goldblatt is the NLT chief scientist. His background is actually in remote sensing and commercialization and nighttime lights. I'm his marketing guy, so I'll talk about him all day. He asks, what is the role of publicly available satellite data for GEOINT? Do you see an increased utilization of free data for GEOINT, rather than relying on an expensive proprietary imagery? So this is kind of, we're thinking where you were going with that.
And it's a great question, because I'll tell you, Dr. Goldblatt, every day decisions are made to forego by commercial companies, to forego, and by the government, federal, civil, more than anyone else, to forego paying for proprietary imagery and going back to rely on publicly available satellite data, and sometimes publicly available airborne drone imagery. So in this country and Europe, we have great programs like NAPE, the National Aerial Imagery Photography. We have Landsat. We have in the European Space Agency, the Copernicus program, the Sentinel satellites. We now have companies that provide global interferometric synthetic aperture radar data.
Yeah.
Who would of us ever have imagined that companies like a Descartes Labs and others, Kodak Research, IBM Research, GE Research, would be standing up interferometric synthetic aperture radar globally, so you can go anywhere in the globe and look at that. That's using Sentinel data. So
Yeah.
the rise of the use of publicly available data in the commercial world is still very strong. Big industrial supply chain companies use it, and organizations that have to mitigate sustainability. So deforestation or sustainability and all of the other things you associate with that,
Yep.
managing the civil rights of laborers who sometimes could be taken advantage of in those parts of the world. The go-to data is still the free data. And in the federal civil side of the community, the federal civil governments worldwide, they have a smaller budget for data than do the Department of Defense and the intelligence communities worldwide. And so they also rely heavily on the availability of data that is been available to them no data are free, because you still have to ingest it, you have to clean it, you have to get it to the standards of processing and analysis that you want. So there's a cost there.
Yeah.
But yes, and open source data. Yes, I think that's not going away anytime soon. And that's what's pushing commercial companies and the government to say, I don't want to buy the pixel. I don't want to own the pixel. I want an insight from the pixel.
Right, and that's where it's going. Is basically what you're saying is that, you know, it's not about where the data comes from and how it got there, but what can it tell me about the problem I'm trying to solve?
Yeah, be very clear though. These people are very well educated.
Yeah.
They've been in their industries for 100 years. So the Cargills, the Unilevers, the Koch brothers, the Bungys, these are companies that have historical legacy that goes back 100 years. They know their business. So you can't, you mathematically have to show them the correctness and the accuracy of the data. You have to give them error metrics as well, and then they make a decision if that's better than what they already do. And if it is, and it gives them an edge up on their decision making, then they'll engage with it. But they don't care what that stack of data looks like. They know it's a stack, so that data fusion that Dr. Goldblatt's referring to, and they want that data stack. They want it verified, validated, and then they'll use it.
And I think that leads me to my last question, because I think it goes back to what you used to do to get to where we are now, is the education, not only education at the university or below, but at the educating the consumer. Remote sensing has become a ubiquitous product that people don't necessarily and it's you can do Earth View on in your car's display now for your street routing, right? And so we've come a long way, and I think education was part of that that use case. Where do you see the continued role of education and modeling and accuracy and validation and so on? That's so critical now as you go into the future, regardless of where it comes from, how accurate it is, how useful it is, it's going to have to be validated through educated folks, obviously. And so where do you see education in GEOINT and remote sensing and GIS going?
So it's really, we have more access to education now than we've ever had. So before, when we used to do seminars and workshops, that was labor intensive. You had to travel somewhere and a group of people came together. Now, given the fact that we're on a Zoom meeting and we can talk to multiple people at once, Imagine this was an synthetic aperture radar class, and we were actually training people on subsidence and other sets of data that could be used. Once you see subsidence in a certain area, what other kinds of data sets do you call on? That's the kind of education that's going on now. And I think that's happening at a bigger level as well. So organizations like the Geosecretariat out of Switzerland, United Nations, UNEP, and the World Food Program, the World Resources Institute does a lot of training, and then every company involved in data fusion, machine learning, whether it's a drone, a high altitude platform system, or a satellite, continue to do education. And that's what our big mega conferences at GEOINT, the GEOINT conference, the Air and Space conference in Europe, InterGeo, and others are all about. I don't see the need for those going away anytime soon, but I have seen more readily available workshops out to the rest of the world. I will say that my experience thus far this year, because everything went virtual, I had papers accepted at IEEE, the International Geoscience and Remote Sensing Group, IGARS, as well as the American Institute for Aeronautical and Astronautical. I had a paper there yesterday. There are a lot of challenges with everything being online, but one organization did not charge for their sessions, and I had 287 people in my panel discussion. Another organization charged, and there were less than 40. So I will say, just like free publicly available data, the predisposition to go get educated is largely going to those that are really blasting out their capabilities on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and outward bound campaigns to say, come and learn about this for free. So I still see a big disparity in those pay attendance versus the free. Jack Dangerman at Esri, Esri conference was free this year. At one point in time, they had 87,000 people online going to the technical sessions. So that tells you kind of people want to know. We've got a big opportunity right now where we're engaging with the government in ways that we haven't engaged with them before, because a lot of them are at home still and they need access to commercial data. And the more from April to today, my first call in April with the government, nobody talked. So, and they didn't ask questions because they were like, I can't ask questions and I can't talk. And versus yesterday, everybody was asking questions and even putting them in chat. So we've changed kind of the dynamic, and people are not going to want to go back to the old way. So the big difference on the government side is this, what we call the low side to the high side communication. They've started to see the value of commercial capability and how to use it. And that's going to stay. That's here for the, I think, for the long term.
To be honest with you, in many ways, I'm glad that that's where we are. Shawana, I mean, you make time for us today. I want to say again, remind people how busy you were actually this week specifically, and to say thank you for doing this. And I think you're right on the money on that that prediction, because we're already starting to see that. For example, we're launching with several partners. Like Ron, if you're able to just turn your mic on and describe what Geo4Dev is. It's actually a training and free access platform in partnership with several organizations. Ron, are you able to describe what Geo4Dev is as a part of our closing, and invite Dr. Johnson, or is that maybe I'll do it for you if Ron is not able to do that? But Geo4Dev is a program that UC Berkeley. Are you available, Ron? I don't, yeah, your volume is low.
Is that better? Okay,
Now,
okay, so you can go ahead.
okay, so yeah, Dr. Johnson, Shawana. I still, I mean, I obviously have this back and forth as one of your former employees here. So Geo4Dev is about the mission of giving back and through education, resources, and so on to the international development community. It is launched in partnership with the University of California at Berkeley, Center for Effective Global Action, CIGA, and we are one of the first partner, commercial partner to help deploy exactly the model you were talking about, ways to give the expanded use case for remote sensing and GEOINT and beyond commercial to the development world even further, similar to some of the organizations you mentioned earlier. And so I see that where that's going. I'd love to get a closing kind of where your thing. And if you had any questions for me, I feel like this is almost like a reunion for me here. But we are right at the 2-minute mark.
So thank you for having me. Yeah, this week and last week and next week, there were a lot of geospatial conferences that had been planned. Yeah. I should actually be sitting in Las Vegas, but oh well, that's just not how it went. But all of the speaking engagements and the papers did get published, so that's all good news. But I'd really like, G, for you to tell the attendees a little bit more about New Light and what your focus for the future is.
So we are a business based out of DC. We've got all kinds of customers. So the geoscience and GeoINT a vertical for us. We do a lot of DevOps and cloud computing work, software engineering work, and it's all about bringing capability and capacity to our customers. I think that's where you touching it back to what you're talking about. It's not going to be whether it's AWS, Azure, or Google. It is how easy is it for me to get to what I need to get done and get it done well, and trust that is being done right. And so that's where our niche is, and very science-based team. We've got team members across technology and remote sensing applications, supporting federal government, both sides of the civil and non-civil government agencies here in the US. We're supporting World Bank and so on. So we're doing the mission that you set us out to. I don't know if you knew you were doing that to me back in 1990s EOSAT. Thank you, Shawana. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. It's a great lesson in history of GIS and GeoINT from one of the people who's been in the trenches for the last X number of years doing it. And I look forward to the next catch up with you. And we will wrap this together and see what comes out of it and share that with you and the world. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Get some rest. I know you've been busy on these calls all week and you still have that energy. I love it.
Yeah. So you've got to do something you love, and that's the only thing I cared about you figuring out when you were a college intern. I think I said that to you a lot. Find something you're passionate about, and that gets you excited every day. And I can tell you for a fact, I still have those days every day.
Wonderful. With that, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, stop recording.